Okay, I'm on air. It says I'm on air. Okay, right. Better check that level. Get rid of that screen. Aha, I'm on air, finally. Hello. No one's watching yet, but I'm on air. Live stream. Good, okay. Get rid of my mouse. Right. Well, anybody that tuned in last time, I was painting this cutter mech that's a tag for the Infinity game, and I was focusing on painting the gun here, which I got halfway through after about an hour. Mind you, in that hour I spent a lot of time trying to find paints and messing around, because doing this live means that I'm not always necessarily completely prepared for every stage of the painting. However, I'm just going to get stuck in again now with this latest effort, which means I'm going to try and finish some more on this weapon. I've got my greys and colours all sort of lined up in front of me here, and in terms of how I'm doing this, some people might be able to see that I've got a camera up on the side here that provides the complete overview, and down here this small camera here is a GoPro, which I've got a zoom lens on, which has enabled me to get in rather closely with this model. Also, that you can probably see some movement over on this side. I've got a small display by a company called Lilliput, which allows me to get a very good close-up instant view of what I'm doing, just in case I'm putting my hand in front of the model like I'm doing just now, which makes it difficult to see what's going on. So, well, without further ado, I shall continue on this. So what I was doing, it was picking various greys. I'm using these Lifecolor paints. This is a light grey, and there's a nice haze grey they do here as well. So basically what I'm going to do is an extra layer of highlighting on the grey. So I'm finding the next sort of brighter grey, and I think this is the one that I selected before I started painting. So I'll give it a shake. And this is the most exciting bit of the video, watching paints get shaken. Then what I do is I have these pipettes. I use those to suck the paint out of there and decant the paint into my wet palette, which is sitting over here. The wet palette just stops the paint from drying out, which it has a tendency to do actually with all these bright lights around with me anyway. So pop the lid back on. Try and get this camera stable. Right, grab some paint for the brush. So this is quite a bit brighter. I'm going to use this for edging along the side of the weapon there. So as I see, in terms of how much paint I've got on the brush, it's quite a lot. I may just take a little bit of that off just so that I can see that I'm going down, very much going down the total edge of that. Yeah, so this is just edge painting, isn't it? I mean, it's not really that exciting, but it highlights right along the smaller edges. You can also do it against the separate sections of the panel lines. I mean, traditionally this was called panel lining. So I was running out of paint on the brush at that point, but that's okay because I only want a very small amount. And then I've noticed I've gone up there a little bit, but it should be okay. So that's the noise of me shaking my brush out. Just to give people who haven't looked before what I was doing, I used this Tamiya Modelling Brush Pro. It's size 00. They are sable brushes. They last me a long time. I really like them as a brush. Okay. I guess the other thing to note at the moment is quite late in the day. My old eyes are taking a while to cut in. Hopefully within the next about 10 minutes my antique machinery will start to work and I'll be able to see what I'm doing. At the moment I'm just putting the brush down there and just praying it's going in the right place. Can you see that? Probably not. Is that in focus? It is about there. So edging on these bits that have been shaded in the last video, just sort of make them pop out a bit more. And you can see the painting's probably a little bit rough around that area there, but I can tidy that up. So what I might do at this stage is just give myself one of those sort of slightly darker tones of grey. This is Panzergrau flashed shade. Shake it up. Probably decanted too much of that out, but yeah, it's messy business using these pipettes, but they certainly help get this out. I mean, when I used to paint in the early days, I would have just, actually what I tended to do is just use a big fat brush to transfer paint, but now try and do that with a little bit more care. And the other thing with this wet palette is that you can afford to sort of put a few splashes of paint. It's not going to dry out, which is pretty good. Okay, so it's got a slightly darker tone, and I'm going to go along these edges that I've kind of messed up a minute ago. Probably made them a bit too bright. Just to sharpen it a bit. I've got a bit too much water on the brush there. Can you even see what I'm doing? Here we go, double check. So one thing I tend to do when I paint is, which is bad, which is jump around between paints and areas, being a little bit sort of chaotic. And that's where I'm coming back to this bit and edging it. Hopefully those lights aren't too harsh, and you can sort of see the shading building up on that sort of chunky grip. Interestingly, I just noticed on that grip and it's a kind of a inset. So anyway, it's really hard to like strike up a conversation while I'm doing this, because it takes up quite a lot of like brain power. So now I'm going to grab another slightly darker shade again. That's actually probably too dark. That's not too bad. This colour is Grigio Scuro, mostly Italian colour. These Lifecolor paints are quite nice actually. I think I mentioned that in almost every video, but they are they're good for the airbrush and also good for painting, so good sort of combination. They're quite matte, very matte really, and they do a huge range of colours. So here we go, I've got an even darker shade just to tidy up where I'm messing up a few times around here. So that was a good example of picking the wrong paint out of the wet palette. Now, hopefully you can see that using a wet palette does at least speed things up. I can dive between these three greys now. Whoops, that's probably not showing what I'm doing. Right, there's a bit there down the back of the hand, and I think I need to get into that. So I've not really covered it with paint. I'm going to do a minor adjustment of the lights. That's maybe helping me a bit. I'm not too worried about areas that are really out of the way. They can stay quite sort of black really. Some back on there. I also spent some time last time thinking about what I should do with this main casing area here. That's just water on there at the moment, but I'm thinking of leaving it black. The sight I was actually thinking of doing white, so I may go over that with a very light grey now in preparations for making it white, and then probably use a wash on it to a pale wash, like a blue wash. I shall start with the grey. I mean, it's white at the moment only because that's what it was originally airbrushed as. Again, it's got a sort of large area around the back. It's difficult to get even light on it actually, since I'm doing this in the evening. One of the fascinating things about lights, and I heard someone mention this the other day, is there's certain lights you put on and they actually make the room feel darker. And that's what happens with these really strong spotlights I've got here. They're Luxo lamps that are sort of pointing in, and the challenge with them is they've got daylight bulbs in them, but they do tend to make everything look very starkly in shadow, so high contrast. You probably can't see what I'm doing around the back there, but just giving this this very pale grey on the sight. And again, you can't really see around there when you're looking at the model. Yes, I don't know what scales of models that anybody paints that may be watching, but you know, I typically paint 15mm, and this is quite big really in comparison. So the other thing with this is that this is obviously, typically with YouTube I might do a video that lasts half an hour or something and edit it, and get away from all the sort of boring bits where you might see me trying to find a paint. But since I'm doing this live, on the one hand it saves me time because I don't have to sit for an hour editing and then publishing. I can just do this and it streams, but on the other hand it does mean that people tuning in end up watching me grab paints and squeeze paint into pots, which isn't that much fun really. So yeah, you can see the other thing is obviously you get a warts and all view when you're seeing this up close, because obviously during a game the thing's going to be quite a long way away and not necessarily as close up where you see all my terrible missed areas. Like for example, it's quite a large black area down the back of that, and I'm wondering whether it's even worth painting, but I could go in there with one of these greys anyway just to give it an edge. And that's the other thing that happens live, is that I almost belched at that very point, and I can't edit that out if I do, so excuse me if I do belch. Anyway, I'm in the UK, you may have noticed by my accent, and it's currently 10 to 8 over here, so I've been going for a good 20 minutes already. So there you go, I've just gone around the back of that with a shade. Again, it doesn't look like much more than just a slight shade underneath there. And then I was going to go straight to white with it, so I need to decant some white out, and for that I might get a fresh pipette so that I'm not cross-contaminating the white. Oh, it's not been used for a while. Probably should have shook it up. Yeah, I'm not doing a great job of getting much paint out of that. Okay, I've got enough. Well, I'm spraying that everywhere, great. Yes, that's made a great, fantastic mess, which I'm not too worried about. So, on with the white to this site. I'll have a quick reset of the lights to see whether I can. That might be a bit less less harsh really. One day I'll get these lights sorted, I won't have to keep fussing with them. Okay, it's not looking too bad. So this is an experiment. Okay, so I don't mind experimenting as well, because that's kind of the whole idea with this. But I've got a couple of the washes over here, and one of them in particular is, there's a grey liner, and this is from a set from Lifecolor. In fact, it's from a set which I can put full frame in the shot there, and which is, it's wings and fuselages, liquid pigments, and they do a whole range in there of various different pigments. So they're all kind of washes or inks, well, they call them pigments, and they include in the pack a wash remover, which they say is free. Essentially, the wash remover is basically just as clear liquid that if you've made a mistake or you want to thin down the amount of wash or pigment, sorry, that you've put on, you can use that. Put it on wet it on a brush, and it will pull the previously placed liquid pigment off. So this is called grey liner. I've actually not used this one before, so let's see where I go. Clear off some of this rubbish that's building up. So I don't particularly have a different wash brush. If I was washing a large area, I might use a larger brush on a big vehicle or something. So this is called grey liner, and I'm going to just wash it into the edging on here. Can you see that? Probably not incredibly well, but see, when I put the brush on, it has a tendency to sort of run into the edges of it. Okay. Drop a bit more on the back and around the base there. So obviously it's gone on wet at the moment, so you know, when you've got a shine coming out of the so you've got a shine coming out now, which looks a bit wet, so it doesn't look great, but that will dry off. I shall leave it, and then I might come back and tidy up with a bit more white along the edge, or a little bit more grey to shade it in. So the other thing I wanted to do and detail up was this kind of thing in the middle there, which I haven't got around to yet, but I'm thinking at the moment that I'm going to have another go at the ammo barrel on the back there, because I intended it to be quite a bright red. I've got this red called Rosome Matte. See, this is me diving around again without finishing something, but it's just kind of how I just get stuck in, really. Another pipette's needed. I'm going to cut this one because last time I didn't get much in the way of paint up. Put a load back in. Yeah, then I'm just sort of squishing it out into the water to clean out the pipette. I mean, these pipettes, I think when you buy them online, I get them on eBay, they're literally something like 4 or 5p each, so I tend to use them for a little bit, try and make sure I get a few dozen uses out of them before binning them, but they clog up quite quickly with the coloured paint. Yeah, so I started with a brown on here, then I've built up with this red tone, which, dare I say, it looks a bit like a kind of a lipstick colour. But what I want to do is highlight up the red a bit more. I don't know if I really want, I don't want it to look like it's hot, but I was thinking about possibly going on with some orange as well. That was a bad brushstroke. Just trying to make sure that it's not too much brown showing up on there. Right, now I think I need a brighter red for that. And this is where I dive into a different paint range. Evil Sun Scarlet, that's quite red. Right, that's probably not even going to decant probably, because it's Games Workshop sort of goop. And this is an interesting one for you. When they brought out these new paints where they do them in layers and edging and various things like that, I bought a reasonable amount of them in a set, and within about 6 months most of them were ruined, even the ones I hadn't used. So I don't know whether they're building an end of life into their paints now to make you go and buy more, but not very good quality. And the pots don't help either. These Lifecolor pots are great because you get to really tighten on that lid after you've used it, and you don't get any of the paint drying out. So here's my wet palette at the moment, and the progress of what's going on. So there's the whites and the various grey shades, and there you can see that Lifecolor red, and then the brighter GW red. And the wet palette itself, there's blotting paper, well, the sponge underneath that you put the water on, then blotting paper, and then tracing paper basically on the top. And that keeps the paint wet in between. You can seal it away, like so, and apparently come back later, but if you leave that for a day, it's ruined. Really, the sort of professional users of these, for painters, you can store acrylic paint, the kind that comes in tubes that's sort of super thick. That lasts a long time on these because it doesn't sort of just go all runny, but if you left that for a day with your paints on, come back to the next day, it will just be like a smeary mess of watery paint that's kind of unusable. So it's not great for like reusing the paint later on, but it is good while you're painting to be able to use it. Also, I've put this sort of cleggy Games Workshop red on there, but as soon as it's on there, it's drawing up some moisture from below, so it does thin the paint a bit as well. So if your brush is also got a little bit of moisture on it, you get to thin the paint on that palette at the same time. So this red is actually much brighter, and I'm wondering whether I should shade it first, but I'm just going to go on. Can you see it? I think so. probably one of the toughest areas to do where I'm keeping it in camera. Yeah, that's the worst thing to do, isn't it? I was just thinking of increasing the brightness of this red, and you just don't want to add white to red because it just goes pink. And that's kind of basic stuff, really. Yeah, so looking more red now and less brown than it was. And the brown still sort of being a good base shade to a degree. Yeah, just generally not happy with this Games Workshop paint. This red is it's going on okay because I'm keeping it thin. It's alright. It looks alright for me. I don't know what it's looking like on camera. I'm keeping the sort of darker brown in the shaded areas. It's looking more red for me than it was. And what I might do now then is just blend that up with a sort of orangey colour. What have I got orange wise? That's 2 terracotta. What colour is that? Oh, I've got an orange colour and another Lifecolor one. So I wonder how that shading's coming on the site. It's looking sort of okay with that wash, although I've got a sort of a blackened area around there that could probably just do with a. Here we go, diving into another area. I think that's dry now anyway, the ink, but I'm going to go in because I've left it maybe too black around the edge. And a little bit of white again back on this. Edges. Okay, so I've got this orange. I'm going to decant some of that out. How are we doing for time? 34 minutes. Oh yeah, if anybody is watching, you can come back later as well, of course, that you don't need to hang around because this will be saved afterwards. It's not like a one-time performance. And you can come and watch paint dry anytime you like, really. So I've got the orange, the Games Workshop red. So what I'm going to do to start with is just, again, benefit the wet palette. My old paint's still on there, and I can just sort of bring the two together. Across the streams, 2 manufacturers worth of paint. Probably some kind of terrible alchemy going on now. And so I've got something in between the two. I mean, it's overkill really going through this sort of level of shading. There's probably enough on that barrel in terms of interest already, but sorry, barrel, but weapon pod. So I'm just shading this as a sort of a central shade area, as if it's got some light falling out in the middle. I'm also going to go on to the end, the brown end there with that colour too. And the edges back here. That's all visible, probably not. So it's possibly beginning to look like it could be a sort of heat on here, but otherwise just light falling on it really. Well, the other thing I do is I often, like I've went on there once with quite thin paint, and then I'll just go back on there again, rather than put really thick paint on in one go. So now I'm just going to go straight to the orange I've got in there, and there won't be as much of this going on. It's definitely giving it a kind of a shape. Whether that's a good shape or not, I don't know, but it's okay. I mean, the rest of the model was airbrushed and masked, and hasn't had its sort of shading complete anyway. Yeah, looks a little bit more interesting than it was before. I'll sort of move it around because if it gets a bright light on it, it can sort of ruin it a bit. You can see there straight away that I probably need that mid-tone to just blend in from about there. Okay, probably done enough on that. Right, so maybe I shall now go back to the greys, which I've been working on before and maybe should have finished, but I'll go back to the lighter grey and just continue to do a bit more lining to bring in some definition. So along the back there. Okay, I've gone quiet, it's because I'm concentrating. So anyway, I don't know if anybody plays Infinity. I do occasionally, and it's good fun. You roll a d20 that's opposed, as in, see that's too bright for that area. Yeah, you roll a d20 and the defender rolls a d20 as well, for a sort of defense roll versus a attack roll. And when you roll the 20 as an attacker, you essentially need to get, it's the person that comes closest to their score. Now I won't go into that in massive detail now because I haven't played it for a while and I'll make a mistake. But yeah, you've got to get close to whatever if you win, it's then the person who's rolled closest to what their score, either their sort of attack or defense profile. So how I paint is that I might go on and I might make a bit of a mistake and go, oh, I've put too much light grey in one area, and then I'll come back and go, okay, I've splashed a load of paint over there because my eyesight's not great, and I need to maybe define it a bit better. I mean, equally in the shadow here of the sort of armpit shadow, I might not brighten it up quite as much. So just give you another example. I've done 41 minutes, well 20 minutes left, but one thing I also do is sort of white dots very fine, just located on edges, not very big at all, so you want hardly any paint on there. And I would edge this with it just at the tip, and obviously modern armies, they don't want modern armies don't want weapons that reflect light, otherwise you're not going to use your cover very well. But I don't mind doing a bit of a bright white dot on the edges to give it that sort of fantasy, well, it's not fantasy but sort of sci-fi feel to it. Probably too much paint there. In fact, the one thing you can do with this sort of white dots that I'm doing right here now is you can also put them on black areas, because it looks like a very fine shine on the black. And of course, again, no one wants their weapon shining, but if you put enough white dots dotted around on key areas, it certainly can make it sort of pop a bit, even the darker black areas. So yeah, the more I look now at the, actually from tabletop again, let's have a little moment of, I shall take the camera out so you can sort of see GoPro at, I'm sorry, the zoom lens off, but you can see sort of more tabletop height view. It's probably a bit too bright a light on it actually, but just generally where I am with things here. I've got a row of paints up there. There's the wet palette. I've tried to improve my workflow by getting these cheap acrylic tubs from Amazon, and I just put my sort of metal tweezers and blades in there, bigger brushes, the pipettes, and my good brushes in there, so I've got my go-to brushes, and then pincers and scissors and tools in that one. Just because last time I did this live video I was grabbing for stuff and it was all over the place. It was much more sort of improved for live filming. So I shall go back into zoom mode, and there we have it. Got that zoom lens back on again. Alright, that's it. I've just touched it, didn't want to do that. So one thing I did last time is I used the Games Workshop Null Oil, which is a shade on this metal area, and I'm going to go on with a brighter paint again. I've got this gloss gunmetal from Lifecolor again, and again last time I found while I was doing this video that I'd totally lost my silvers, as in they were somewhere over there, then I found one and then it was clogged up, and that's what happens when you don't paint for a while. So I should really decant this silver straight into the into my wet palette, but I'm just going to use it and go straight on here. So just like the white dots, and just picking out details really, edge details on that gun. I think I just went in by mistake to the bit of the muzzle, which I didn't want to do, so I'm probably going to have to put a wash on that again and go repeat the cycle of wash and shadows. Wash to create the shadows, and then back on again with silver. Yeah, it's brighter. Lifecolor do a very interesting silver actually, that you have to polish, and I had it somewhere around, which I'm not going to demo now, but it's called Pigment. It's a pigment, it's a reflecting agent, and basically it's a dust. So if I was to look at it on the camera, you can see it looks like a kind of grey charcoal in there, and when you essentially put it on, it's almost like a pencil charcoal, isn't it? Probably, but with something else in it. You paint it on with a brush, and it then sort of polishes up. Problem with it is that you cannot use it for You can't spray onto it afterwards with any kind of varnish, so it has to be the last thing you do, but you can really polish it up to get a very realistic metal look. So I've got various other washes here. I've got a burnt brown, and in terms of using that, that's probably useful to... Oh, that's not mixed up very well. It's not mixed up very well at all. You can see the underside there, it's like broken apart. Another example of where I haven't painted for a while and my paints are suffering from that. So here's another one, it's called Smoke, and this one I remember is quite a thick wash, but it's just useful again for this gun area. I mean, it's some fine detail there. I'm not even sure if that's in focus for you, but if I go into that section there, you can see it defines the edging. And, you know, tones down the brighter of the sort of brush strokes I've put on there. Might need a bit of water on there as well, because it's quite a thick wash, this one, to sort of give you a smoke look around exhausts. But gun muzzles are okay as well. But it is thin with water. So now I need to leave that to dry a bit. Right, so what to do with this section here? I have no idea. It's still in the back of my mind, and I was thinking, in terms of bringing it in line with the rest of the model, I was thinking of using a blue, and that's probably where I'll go with it. A sort of solid cassette sort of blue, maybe it's a charger or something that goes in there. So if I start with a darker blue and then build up. Actually, I know I quite like this blue. Valine Sinian Light Blue, again another Lifecolor. And a good shake. That's a reasonably large area, so I use my pipette to decant some out there and into the wet palette. The benefit of having a few greys around that I've got on my wet palette over there is that I can use them potentially to go on as a sort of a base shade to that. You can see where this was airbrushed, it's sort of got no to little paint falling on it from the airbrush underneath, and then it sort of has a sort of natural shade on it already, so I may just go straight on with this blue, which I'm going to do. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Okay, you can see underneath again, no gamer's going to see that when it's on the table underneath, but and I didn't paint the rest of the gun under there deliberately for that reason, although I did go there. You can probably see now it's another 50 minutes of painting now, and not much progress, is there? But I guess, you know, I've got the sight sort of nice and bright, again to make him very visible to his enemies, and sort of cleaned up around the front here. The shading's been highlighted up again, a nice edge on there. I can see a mistake there though, which I shall sort of rectify now with a bit of that darker grey mixed in. Can you see what I'm doing? Probably not. I can't. Just clean up that front as if there's a bit more light on it. Oh, I can hear a fox outside. We have problems with foxes around here. urban foxes. When I say problems, they just leave their mess everywhere, which is disgusting. And we moved in this house when the kids were at sort of 10, 12, and about 8 years ago. And if you left a toy in the garden, any kind of toy, in the grass, the fox would crap on it. I don't know what it's doing, trying to claim ownership, but that's foxy behaviour for you. No idea why they were playing that, but obviously the toy went straight in the bin unless it was easily washable. And they still do that now. This very morning I came out of my front door and there was a present. And fox crap, wow, does it smell. So we've never encouraged them, but imagine there's a neighbour somewhere that leaves cat food out or something for them. Oh, that's a bit bright. Not too bad. Yeah, that was perhaps too bright. My hand in the way. Okay, well that first coat of the blue on the sort of charge thing, another lift there, I don't know what it does, but that's on the blue. And again, it's quite stark the way I've edged it, that it doesn't really blend in up there. There's the back of the cassette thing there. Now that hasn't been painted. So again, very difficult for anybody to see, but just behind there, there's a bit of the sort of back of that goes round there. I guess it does sort of keep it in keeping with the overall model. I did a kind of a red in the sort of Under Armour areas, in the sort of muscular bits and pieces they've got around the back here, which are interestingly well sculpted on sort of the mechanics of what keeps this thing moving. And by keeping that sort of a red and then a pale blue there, I guess it does keep it in line, but still makes the weapon distinct rather than making it look like it's, you know, you don't want to be wearing double denim, do you? And that's what it would do perhaps if I'd gone for the full, keeping the weapon the same colour as the model. Right, so what am I doing now? So I've used my light blue, and I've used all these greys, pop some of these out of the way, and I think what I'm going to do now is do a wash. Again, try one of these washes. Now this is an interesting one, another experiment, never used this before, but blue burned exhaust. I wonder what that's going to look like on the little section I've just painted underneath there now. That looks more like a brown burned exhaust. Blue burned exhaust, that's probably a very particular condition that happens on aircraft, where the exhaust has got so hot that it's got that sort of metaling style, and it's probably going to look awful because it looks a bit brown, to be honest. But let's give it a go. I'm going to put it on there. I can always tidy it up afterwards because it's a thin wash. Yeah, wow, that's interesting. One thing they say with this is that these pigments, because they're a pigment, which means they don't have you know, all the various bonding agents that you get with paint. So it is very thin, and the pigment means that in it is a bunch of kind of, well, I guess it's a very fine dust of a pigment colours in there, and that's why they give you the stuff that lets you sort of wash it off afterwards. So I'm going to go on with it completely, and then I'm going to try the remover that they've got to see what it looks like pulled off. And I expect it's going to look terrible, but let's see where I go. So I'm going to let that dry. Well, I probably don't need to have to let it dry too much. Okay, there you can see, well, it is drying. But so here's the wash remover. So this is a bit of a paint demo as well. I've never used this before either. I just got these new Lifecolor pigments. Everything I've ever had from Lifecolor has been pretty good. So, you know, I trust them as a brand in terms of the colours being very strong, and also their interesting washes, which are all a bit different and interesting too, like this one. So I've just put some of that on the brush, this remover, and so I'm going to go on the main part of this barrel and just see. Yeah, I can see it is removing it. Potentially giving me a few tide marks though, but nothing that can't be sort of cleaned up, I guess. Actually, tide marks are always a bit of a problem with washes anyway, in that when I say washes I mean pigments, and washes like Nuln Oil and Griffin Sepia that people use, in that when you if you thin down a wash too much, you will get this kind of very fine tide mark. So this is interesting. I'm feeling like I'm kind of moving it around more than I'm washing it off, and I don't know if that's because of the brush. So if I'm going to go for a bigger brush, this is a number 0. It should allow me to sort of get more of this stuff off in one hit. Oh, it's a very subtle effect. Maybe easier on a larger area. There you go, there's a bit of that sort of tide marking going on. I'm interested by that. I think it could have other uses, and they do various other colours in this range as well. And the fact that you can sort of strip it off, push it around until you're sort of happy with the way the shading's gone is quite interesting. Yeah, I'm going to go back to the small brush and just strip off the edges. So I'm almost at my hour where I end up being too exhausted from sitting here and chatting and drying out, and I've just realised my water for drinking I've left it outside. But here we go, is that in view? So I'm going to try and pull this paint off here as well using this. I don't think I have to worry if it falls on my acrylic that's already been painted on, so that's one benefit. And I can just strip it off there. Actually, that's incredibly subtle, and I can see why people use this on bigger tank sort of modelling projects where you might put it, or like it. This is from the aircraft set, just to show that again in case people hadn't been around here before and they've just joined. But I was just using this liquid pigment from Lifecolor, Italian company. So sometimes some of their paints have Italian wording on there, like this one here. This is just a kind of dark grey. But this is a set that they do which are pigments. So rather than a wash, it's like pigments that you'd normally get in a very fine powder. And I do have sets of those around, which I shall show you what I mean by that. So I've had these for years and used them occasionally. This is called light dust. And this is what a pigment traditionally comes like. As you can see, it is just a pigment powder. And unlike paint, it doesn't sort of break down to a very fine level, it's just a dust. So I assume what they've done with this set is that they've put that dusty, powdery stuff into the substrate, or into the actual liquid, and mixed it with something that makes it easily removed with this remover that they include in there. And that's what I was just using then, this remover from Lifecolor. After I'd put on, not the grey liner, I'd used the burned exhaust wash, which again you can imagine that's on an aircraft. Around the exhaust it starts to look a bit burnt up. So basically I put that blue on there to try and keep the gun in line with what the rest of the colours are on the model, but then after putting the blue on, the blue burned exhaust went on, and then I've washed it off with the remover. Apparently you can do that any time. Obviously once you've varnished it, that's it, it's locked in, but you can also blend these different pigments. So you've got options to sort of mix them and blend them, while you also can come back and strip them off without, and I've used these before because I have, again when I do my airbrushing, I quite often use the proper enamel washes, which I'm just going to get one. This is probably not an enamel wash, but yes it is. This is a AK Interactive Ship's Weathering Colours, and that's for salt streaks and ships. So, but this is an enamel, and when you put it on it gets smelly when you're trying to use the thinners to sort of strip it off if you put too much on. And this stuff doesn't smell at all, it even says that, non-smelling. It's probably deadly potent in terms of breathing it in, but who knows. So that's about it. So I've made some more progress. I've sharpened up the edges around here with some white dots. I've also done some more sort of shading on that casing area. I still haven't really tackled the black interior, so I'm not sure what to do with that. I've tidied up this barrel a bit more. One thing I'll probably do, just because I'm now winding down, but I'd probably put some decals on there. I haven't got my decals out at the moment, but, or decals if that's how you pronounce it. I might put one or two sort of white ones on the side of the barrel there, the ammo barrel, which I'm assuming it is. I think they'll just again add to the detail neatly, and maybe some like Chinese, Japanese style text along that as well will clean it up. So I'm quite impressed by those washes from Lifecolor. I mean, that's just the first use, and it was quite experimental. And I can see inside here, I probably need, if I'm going to keep this black, I probably need to go back in and tidy some of that up, because I've splattered onto it. And I don't know what to do here. This capacitor thing, I was thinking of making it green. Go on with a dark green and then a sort of lighter green. You can probably barely see them, but it has yeah, it has sort of strips along the side there. So if I went in with a dark green on that and then lit them up with a light green, I could even do a glow effect around there maybe. And there's the white site, which is kind of looking okay. Yeah. Right, so, well, goodness knows, this probably needs another hour, but I'm finishing it now, and I might come back to that in the next video. So I've just got to finish the darn thing, and I need to do the base. I've got a standard colour I use on the sand, a sort of sand colour, and khaki for the this kind of base, and then it needs some detail, maybe some highlighted lights in the base too. I'm going to put some decals on the armour plating. I may do some more lining, because I've got some lining inks which could be part of the next video, and then with some decals on there I might even do some chipping and weathering as well, and then the thing will be done. I'm not going to do a huge amount of shading on the main body, but just a few detailed areas to bring it up. So there we go, you can see the edge of the weapon coming in here. A little view on what it's looking like so far. Right. Okay. Right. Yeah, the other thing is I do a lot of 15mm, and I've got some new models from Ground Zero Games, which is kind of called Moon Grunt, and they're a Chinese sort of near future sci-fi for Moon encounters, and USA faction as well. And I've got both of those, and I'd like to airbrush those and weather them as vehicles. So that'll be not as much detail. I just don't go up to this sort of level of detail when I'm doing vehicles for 15mm games. So hopefully it won't be such a laboriously long process to go through, and you see more progress rather than what looks like tiny steps forward. That's what I'm doing with that. Okay, thanks everybody for listening in, and I'll just wave off goodbye. Okay, thanks very much for listening, and tune in again soon. Cheers. Right, mouse, where's the mouse gone? Shut down this live stream. Shut